The headlights slice through the whirling snow, and a peculiar, almost ghostly light falls on the bridge. What they showed made no sense. A slanted silver 2003 Honda Civic parked against the guardrail of the St. John's Bridge. The driver's door was slightly ajar, the engine was cold as stone, and not one print marred the pristine snow around it. Inside, a purse, wallet, credit cards, and $43 remained untouched. A child's stuffed animal rested in the back seat. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the holder, lipstick smeared across the rim. But there was no sign of 28-year-old Rachel Sullivan. It was January 15th, 2005, one of Portland's coldest nights on record, with temperatures dipping to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Somehow, in the middle of that frozen night, a young single mother had vanished without a trace. That car had no business being there, Detective Marcus Wilson explained to the press at the time. She resided in the other direction. No affiliations with the neighborhood, no cause whatsoever to be on that bridge at 11:30 p.m., particularly not during a snowstorm. Before we dive deeper into this confounding case, be sure to subscribe and join our community of investigators, because together we reassemble these enigmas piece by piece, story by story. Portlanders still recall that winter clearly. The city, normally famous for its relentless drizzle, was blanketed with 3 consecutive snowstorms. Streets were slippery, the city all but closed down, and most people remained huddled inside, which made the sighting of that car all the stranger. It was all anybody was talking about, recalls Diane Larson, who resided in Portland at the time. We began locking our doors more, checking on one another. You just don't anticipate something like that here, particularly in a neighborhood where everyone does know everyone. For the tight-knit Selwood neighborhood where Rachel resided, fear spread rapidly. Parents were walking children to school. Neighbors were putting up security cameras. Community watches appeared overnight. What was even more disturbing was how totally inexplicable her disappearance was. No fight, no witnesses, no motive, just vanished. We couldn't wrap our heads around it, explained Thomas Green, the owner of Rachel's favorite coffee shop. She was just gone, like she'd been swallowed up by the night. Police moved quickly, but the tempest had destroyed valuable evidence. Tire tracks and footprints were buried under snow. Bridge surveillance cameras iced up. Rachel's cell phone records indicated one final call at 9:17 p.m., and then electronic silence. Meanwhile, her daughter at 4 years old remained at the babysitter's house that evening, alone, disoriented, and oblivious to the fact that her life was about to be transformed forever. What could have possibly torn a devoted mother away from the child she adored? And where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I always find it amazing how stories like this reach people from every corner of the map. When morning broke in Portland on the 16th of January, no one could have dreamed that this case would still be unsolved nearly 2 decades later, or that its ultimate solution would shake the community to its foundations. Rachel Lynn Sullivan was born April 12, 1976, to Margaret and David Sullivan, the middle child between older brother James and younger sister Olivia. She was raised in Eugene, Oregon, and was the type of person everyone knew. Quick-tongued, strong-willed, always laughing. Rachel was our firecracker, her mom Margaret tells me, her voice gentle with remembrance. She always knew what she wanted, even when she was little, and she wouldn't let up until she got it. When she was 8 years old, she wanted to learn piano. We couldn't pay for lessons, so she learned by herself, just her and an old keyboard that we got at the thrift store. That unyielding resolve drove her through life. She graduated from South Eugene High School in 1994 and became the first member of her family to attend college. A partial scholarship sent her to Portland State University, where she majored in business administration. She had this 5-year plan all mapped out, says Sister Olivia. College, career, financial stability, and then maybe a family. Rachel wasn't the kind of woman to leave her fate up to chance. But as things tend to do, fate doesn't care. While at Portland State her junior year, she stumbled upon Tyler Brooks, a suave architecture major with grand aspirations and an even grander grin. Their whirlwind affair rolled through campus like a summer thunderstorm, and in no time they were wed. 2 driven young dreamers set on conquering the world together. Rachel held pause on pursuing her own business, taking an administrative position at a regional insurance firm, while Tyler ascended through the ranks at a prominent Portland architecture firm. For a time, things seemed stable until cracks started to form. By the age of 24, tension had become noticeable to their friends. Money, priorities, and whose career was more important to them were the constants in arguments. In accordance with subsequent court records, Tyler's career was the focal point, while Rachel's goals were subtly shelved. She loved him, says Margaret, Rachel's mother, but she wasn't about to get lost in anyone's shadow. That just wasn't her. The last straw was in 2000. Rachel discovered that she was pregnant, and instead of excitement, she was greeted with reluctance. Tyler, according to friends, just wasn't prepared to become a father. 3 months into pregnancy, Rachel moved out, packed her belongings, and requested a divorce. It was the toughest and most courageous thing she ever did, her sister Olivia comments. She realized being a solo mother would not be easy, but never once did she look over her shoulder. On February 3, 2001, Rachel gave birth to her daughter, Rachel Sullivan. From that day on, her life centered around her little girl. She organized every aspect of her life with stability and love in mind, working from home when she could, keeping strict calendars, and always having time for bedtime stories and laughter. Her fridge was filled with Kayla's artwork, recalls Julia Sanos, Rachel's best friend. She'd come to work looking like she hadn't slept after working on Halloween costumes through the night, but she'd still arrive with a smile. Being Kayla's mom, that was all that mattered to her. By 2003, Rachel's career was starting to take off. She discovered her true calling in digital marketing, securing a position as a content strategist at an expanding startup. The industry was intriguing to her. It was innovative, progressive, and rich with possibility. When Kayla went to bed, Rachel would spend her nights completing online classes or scribbling down business ideas in a battered notebook. She had this idea about opening her own marketing consultancy when Kayla went to school, Julia remembers. She was not just fantasizing about it, she was working her way toward it, step by step. Her life with Tyler had leveled out to a polite but reserved one. He was prompt about paying child support and spent every other weekend with Kayla, although friends commented that he tended to leave her off early under the usual guise: work. He wasn't the father Rachel had wanted him to be, but at least he was in the picture. Rachel's parents, Margaret and David, still lived down in Eugene but made frequent trips to Portland. Margaret often stayed for long weekends to help with Kayla. "Those were our best days," Margaret remembers fondly. "We'd cook Sunday dinners. Kayla would help, mostly by covering the kitchen in flour, and Rachel would just laugh. She always said those were the moments that made life worth it." The Sullivan family had seen their share of struggles. David's battle with alcoholism had created deep tension during Rachel's teenage years, but by 2005, he'd been sober for nearly a decade. Her older brother James had moved to California, and though distance had dulled their closeness, Rachel made sure the family bond held strong. "She was the peacekeeper," Olivia states, "the one who kept the rest of us in line, no matter how far we drifted apart." In the months leading up to her vanishing, Rachel's world was finally turning around. She'd been promoted to marketing director, a significant promotion with a sweet paycheck to boot. She and Kayla had just moved into a snug little rental house in Portland's Selwood neighborhood, where Kayla at last had her own bedroom, a milestone that Rachel marking like the fulfillment of a dream. And then there was someone else. In November 2004, 2 months before she disappeared, Rachel met Michael Garrison. A mutual colleague introduced them. Michael, a software engineer and divorced father of a 6-year-old son, appeared to get her world right away. Both single parents, both trying to balance work, life, and romance, they connected immediately. Rachel had always been cautious where matters of the heart were concerned. As her friend Julia explained, she wasn't looking to jump into anything serious, but she really seemed happy when she spoke about Michael. She kept saying how nice it was to date someone who got her life as a parent. Their relationship developed organically. Stealth coffee dates becoming park afternoons with their children, giggles at similar stories of parenting, and the soft security of neither needing to justify their priorities. By January 2005, things had become intimate enough for Rachel to take Michael to meet her parents during their regular monthly visit. A giant leap for a woman as guarded as she was. Rachel's world was expanding in other ways too. She'd recently joined a women's entrepreneurship group, meeting weekly with other business-minded women to share ideas and encouragement. Members later told investigators that Rachel was developing a plan for her own marketing agency, one focused on helping environmentally conscious, sustainable brands. She was in such a good place, her mom Margaret says, her voice shaking just a bit. A new home, a promising new relationship, a career she adored, and defined goals for the future. That's why none of this made any sense. People don't just vanish when everything is finally falling into place. But on January 15th, 2005, that's precisely what occurred. Yesterday, Rachel had gone snow boot shopping with Kayla, pre-planned meals for a week, and arranged a play date for Sunday. Every aspect of her life was indicative of someone making arrangements ahead of time, not someone getting ready to disappear. The most difficult part, Olivia whispers, was having Kayla ask when mommy would come home. What do you say to a 4-year-old when you don't even know yourself? That Saturday morning, January 15th, began perfectly normally. In spite of alerts about an impending snowstorm, Rachel and Kayla had their morning like any other weekend. Surveillance video at Bridgetown Cafe indicates Rachel at 8:42 a.m., ordering the day's normal routine. A large Americano for her and chocolate milk for Kayla. She was herself, says barista Heather Mills, smiling, going on about how much fun she was going to have taking Kayla sledding the next day. She'd even purchased her first real sled. Rachel left Kayla at her painting class at the Portland Community Center at 9:30 a.m. Instructor Devin Walsh recalled her as tidy and kind, always looking ahead. She said she'd return at noon, said she just had some errands to run. She'd even prepared an extra sweater for Kayla in case the air conditioning wasn't functioning properly, and reminded her to wash her hands after painting. During 9:45 to 11:20 a.m., Rachel's activities were followed by a string of credit card purchases. 10:07 a.m. Powell's Books, 10:46 a.m. Westbrook Pharmacy, 11:14 a.m. Morton's Grocery, proof of her purchase at Morton's was videoed. Spaghetti supplies and a package of meatballs. The favorite dinner of Kayla. At 11:52 a.m., Rachel went back to the community center to get her daughter. They left holding hands, Devin Walsh later said to police. Rachel was commenting on Kayla's painting and telling her how great it would look on the fridge. The afternoon unfolded just as you'd expect. A 1:15 p.m. FaceTime call with her mother confirmed that Rachel and Kayla were home eating lunch. During the call, Rachel mentioned she'd be dropping Kayla off for a sleepover that evening, then using the rare free night to catch up on some work, and maybe finally take a relaxing bath. Just a typical Saturday night, Margaret recalled gently. Nothing extraordinary for a stressed-out mother who never did anything for herself. At 4:30 p.m., Rachel had left Kayla at her friend Abby Marshall's residence. Abby's mother, Jennifer, subsequently described to police that Rachel had been completely relaxed, talking loosely about plans for the next day's pickup. Even texted me at 4:45, Jennifer explained. She'd forgotten Kayla's favorite stuffed rabbit and said she'd come by later to deliver it. Just a normal mom thing. But that visit would never occur. That 4:45 p.m. text about Kayla's forgotten stuffed bunny would be the last confirmed message anyone would ever receive from Rachel Sullivan. At 6:12 p.m., her phone pinged a cell tower close to her house in Selwood, assuring she'd arrived home unharmed. A neighbor also reported to police that they saw her silver 2003 Honda Civic in her driveway at 6:30 p.m. Rachel's night then becomes a blank. Between 6:30 p.m. and 9:17 p.m., her activity is unexplained. Her only lead is that last phone call, nearly 3 minutes long, placed to Michael Garrison, the man she had been dating. According to phone records, the call originated from Rachel's house. Michael told investigators it was a simple, friendly chat. Rachel had mentioned dropping off Kayla's stuffed animal later that night and casually asked if he wanted to grab coffee sometime next week. She sounded completely normal, Michael told police. Happy, relaxed. She even said she might stop by the 24-hour grocery store for some office supplies. Paper, maybe printer ink. Nothing out of the ordinary. At 10:06 p.m., Jennifer Marshall, Abby, Kayla's friend, and her mom texted a reminder. Did you reconsider dropping off the rabbit? Kayla's asking for it. The message did go through, but was never open. By 11:30 p.m., the blizzard raged on. Jennifer attempted to call Rachel. Straight to voicemail. She called again. 2 more times before midnight. Same outcome. I wasn't frantic at first, Jennifer would later explain to investigators. I thought maybe she'd gone to bed early, or the roads were just too bad. It was unlike her not to answer, but it was snowing heavily. It could have been anything. The next morning, fear set in. Jennifer called again at 9:15 a.m. and once more at 10:30 a.m. Still no answer. That's when she called Rachel's sister, Olivia. I realized that something was off the minute she said Rachel wouldn't answer, Olivia remembered. Rachel would never be quiet when Kayla was gone. Never. Disregarding the dangerous road conditions, Olivia drove directly to her sister's home. The front door was shut, no lights. Entering by her spare key, she found the house eerily quiet, but not looted. Rachel's laptop remained open on the kitchen table. A tea mug, now cold, in front of it. Her winter coat was gone from the hook beside the door. At 12:37 p.m. on January 16, 2005, Olivia properly reported her sister missing. The first 48 hours painted an ominous picture. Rachel's vehicle had disappeared. Her phone was not there, and her device had completely dropped off the grid at 9:48 p.m. the night before. No calls, no texts, no data thereafter. Detectives Marcus Wilson and Anita Torres were tasked with the case. Already by the beginning, the facts unsettled them. A dutiful young mother, no history of instability, disappeared in a snowstorm after telling her family she'd drop off something as innocuous as a stuffed rabbit. Her missing car made the picture even more sinister. By the 17th of January, the police widened their search. Officers combed door to door throughout the neighborhood, wading through snow that covered curbs and obliterated footprints. They collected traffic cam images, though numerous cameras had quit working or frozen during the storm. Then was the eerie break. At 3:15 p.m. on the 17th of January, a good day and a half since Rachel had made her last phone call, a highway patrolman saw a silver Honda Civic on the St. John's Bridge, snow-covered, engine cold, parked crookedly against the guardrail. Fast word spread. By the following morning, January 18th, Portland citizens were in full mobilization. More than 200 volunteers were organized via local community centers and churches, creating search party teams to sweep the bridge side parks, and the precipitous slopes below. The Portland Kayak Club put boats on the icy Willamette River, scouring under the bridge. Drone pilots volunteered to sweep difficult-to-reach areas from the air. Restaurants delivered warm dinners to the searchers, and print shops churned out thousands of posters with Rachel's beaming face. A Facebook page named Find Rachel Sullivan sprung up the same day, and 24 hours later its membership had topped 5,000. Portland wasn't just looking for answers anymore. They were searching for one of their own. "I've never seen Portland rally like this," Detective Wilson told reporters 4 days into the search. "This community refuses to let one of their own vanish without answers." And he was correct. The reaction was incredible. Neighbors, volunteers, complete strangers, all with one goal: to find Rachel Sullivan and bring her home. But for all the hard work, those answers everyone hoped for were agonizingly out of reach. As the first week drew to a close, detectives were still scrambling for concrete leads. Snow persisted to fall in Portland, covering streets and covering clues with waves of white quiet. Detectives Marcus Wilson and Anita Torres established a command center at the Central Precinct, ringed by piles of files, maps, and constant cups of coffee. The find of Rachel's car had left more questions than answers. There was no evidence of a struggle within. The keys were missing, her phone lost, and in the back seat, her stuffed rabbit that she had intended to give her daughter Kayla. "Something about that stuffed animal just didn't feel right to me," Detective Torres later wrote in her case report. "A mom ventures out into a snowstorm to bring her child's comfort toy, and it's left behind in the car? It didn't make sense." Two individuals were immediately at the center of the investigation: Rachel's ex-husband, Tyler Brooks, and Michael Garrison, the man she had been seeing in recent weeks. Tyler Brooks was interviewed on January 18th. His financial records indicated he was up to date on child support, but court records showed the occasional squabble over visitation schedules, a relatively common post-divorce wrinkle. Under interrogation, Tyler seemed upset and genuine. I need her to return, he said to detectives. Kayla needs her mom. His alibi held up nice. Tyler had been at a co-worker's birthday dinner at Riverside Restaurant on January 15th from 7 p.m. until almost 11:30. His credit card receipts indicated he'd paid his bill at 11:42 p.m., and several witnesses reported he hadn't left the party early. Detective Wilson then explained, "We did focus on Tyler. Their breakup was not necessarily a nice one, but there was nothing at all, that indicated violence or residual hatred of a sufficient intensity to precipitate something like this." That left Michael Garrison, the new beau, and the last person to be seen speaking to Rachel. His telephone records confirmed the 9:17 p.m. call that lasted just shy of 3 minutes. While being questioned, Michael was clearly upset. He kept volunteering to assist in any way he could. "We'd only been dating for a few months," he explained to police, "but I liked her. This just doesn't make any sense." Detectives also checked his alibi. Footage from his apartment building revealed him coming home at 8:30 p.m. and not leaving until the morning. His cell phone registered with towers in his neighborhood all evening, steady and trackable. By the way, if you're as captivated by this case as I am, go ahead and give me a like. It really helps more viewers see these stories and keep cases like Rachel's in the forefront of people's minds. Now back to the investigation. Forensic examination of Rachel's car turned up little. No unknown fingerprints, no foreign DNA. The GPS in the car had been cleared manually, eliminating the previous destination, and the heavy snowfall had obliterated any hope of detecting tire or footprints near the car. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, no indication of rushed exit at Rachel's house. Her computer was open on the kitchen table, still logged into easy searches: the recipe for spaghetti sauce, the weather forecast for the week, and a website selling children's clothing. All was normal. The initial weeks were filled with a deluge of false clues. The attendant at a Salem gas station reported seeing Rachel the following morning, only to have the security tapes later identify it as another person. An anonymous call about a cabin near Mount Hood left abandoned turned into a full-scale search, but nothing again. The most promising, but in the end, most maddening lead was provided by a highway worker. He said that he had seen a silver Honda Civic stopped on Highway 26 at about 10:30 p.m. on January 15th. A woman speaking to someone else in another car. For a fleeting, shining instant, detectives believed this could be the break they had been waiting for. But as with so many aspects of Rachel Sullivan's case, the reality was out of reach. When police finally found the owner of that other vehicle, it was merely a college student driving home from a ski weekend. Nothing whatsoever to do with Rachel. "We pursued every lead," Detective Torres recalled later, "and each dead end, it was devastating. Not only as detectives, but as human beings. This wasn't just a case. This was a young mom who went missing, leaving behind a little girl hoping she'd return home." By the first week of February, the investigation had grown in size. Detectives interviewed 47 individuals, collected 28 items of physical evidence, and watched over 200 hours of security tapes from all possible paths Rachel could have taken that night. And yet, they were no closer to knowing what had actually occurred. Speed bump. What time is it where you're viewing from? I always enjoy seeing how our true crime community covers all time zones. Whether morning coffee or a late-night binge, thanks for being here. As winter gave way to spring, the case remained stubbornly secretive. January became February, became March, and yet, nothing. Media attention dwindled. Search parties that once outnumbered the people in entire parks dwindled to a few stalwart volunteers. The Find Rachel Sullivan Facebook group continued to post, but the activity waned, the comments fewer, the hope dwindling little by little. But for detectives, the case never went cold. It just got heavier to lug. By the summer of 2005, the official investigation ground to a halt. Detective Marcus Wilson, who had formerly phoned the Sullivan family every day, now called weekly, then monthly. The former busy task force room at the Portland Police Department gradually emptied as officers were transferred to newer cases. "It wasn't a matter of losing interest," stated former police chief Robert Dunham, "but with no new evidence or leads, each hour spent on it yielded fewer and fewer dividends. We needed to put it into cold case status. The case was never closed, but when Rachel's file was formally sent over to the cold case unit that November, Rachel's family felt the gravity of that word, cold. They never said they were giving up, recalled Rachel's mother, Margaret Sullivan. But that's what it felt like. We understood the reality. Accepting it, that was another story. The file landed on the desk of Detective Sarah Linden, a veteran investigator known for her calm patience and persistence. Inside the thick binder were hundreds of pages, interview transcripts, evidence logs, and a trail of frustration that stretched nearly a year. I assured Margaret and Olivia that Rachel's case wouldn't collect dust on my shelf, Detective Linden said years later. Cold cases take time, but they're never forgotten. Even as the official investigation stalled, Rachel's family would not let her memory slip away. In 2006, Margaret and Olivia established the Rachel Sullivan Foundation, a nonprofit organization committed to aiding families of missing persons and advocating for fresh attention on unsolved disappearances. We directed our pain into action, Olivia said. It was the only means of survival. We couldn't bring Rachel home, but we could assist others who were living the same horror. Each year on January 15, the family held a candlelight vigil on the St. John's Bridge, the spot where Rachel's car was discovered. It started as a small, subdued visit from a handful of relatives, but eventually evolved into a citywide tradition. Dozens, then hundreds attended, candles held against the chill of the Portland evening, reflections dancing on dark waters below. Local television news reported on the vigils. The reporters spoke with Margaret annually, all of them repeating the same question, "Do you still have hope?" And every year she replied softly, "Always." On the 5th anniversary in 2010, the Portland Tribune published a front-page feature, "The Woman on the Bridge, Portland's Enduring Mystery." It generated renewed interest for a time, exciting a few new tips. Detective Linden pursued each and every one, every rumor, every alleged sighting, but one by one they all fizzled. Every anniversary brought hope and heartache, Margaret explained. Hope that someone would finally step forward, and heartache when the phone remained quiet. And amidst all this, all the vigils, the diminishing media coverage, the waiting out of days and weeks and months, one individual bore the softest, most profound wound. Kayla Sullivan. Only 4 years old when her mother disappeared, Kayla spent her childhood in the long shadow of an unanswered question. Missing children have a very specific type of loss, said Dr. Teresa Vaughn, a psychologist who was involved with the family. It's not loss per se, it's living each day with an open door in your heart, and nobody ever walks through it. There is a certain type of pain which occurs due to not knowing. No closure, no certainty, only that nagging maybe. Families of the missing exist in this limbo known as ambiguous loss. They can't fully mourn because part of them still holds out hope, but they can't move on either because it would be like giving up. Since Rachel disappeared, her daughter Kayla lived with her grandmother Margaret, who relocated her life in Eugene to Portland. "I wanted her to have something stable," Margaret whispered. Eventually, Rachel's former husband, Tyler Brooks, started visiting his daughter more and more. By the time Kayla entered elementary school, they had arranged joint custody, but Kayla's questions were the ones no grown-up could possibly answer. "When is Mommy coming home? Why did she leave me? Did I do something wrong?" Margaret recalls attempting to comfort her, breaking her heart every time. "How do you explain to a child," she said, "that sometimes there just aren't any answers?" As Kayla got older, her bond with her mom's vanishing changed too. At 10, she stood before a gathering at the yearly vigil and recited a poem she'd composed about the memories that were already beginning to slip away and how she feared they'd vanish completely. By the time she reached middle school, she no longer spoke about her mom. To other students, she merely wished to be normal. No more sympathetic glances or hushed queries. The adolescence years came with a vengeance. Kayla endured everything a teenager endures, her Aunt Olivia said. Anger, rebellion, heartache. But for her, it was amplified. She needed her mom to guide her through that, and the absence, it was omnipresent. Every January, as the anniversary drew near, journalists would call the family again. But after a while, Margaret and Olivia started turning down most interviews. "She had the right to have her own life," said Margaret, "not to become the missing woman's daughter." By 2015, decades since Rachel disappeared, The case had become as cold as that snowy evening back in 2005. The detectives who first worked on the case had retired years ago. Witnesses' memories had grown cloudy. Even the city itself seemed different. The Bridgetown Cafe, where Rachel was last spotted on tape, was now a health food store. The community center where she dropped off Kayla had been renovated beyond all recognition. And yet, through it all, the Sullivans never stopped. Margaret, now in her 70s, still made her monthly visits to the cold case unit, always bringing coffee and donuts. "I wanted them to remember she's not just a file," she said. "She's my daughter." 2 decades is too long to wait, Olivia thought back. We gave our word, to Rachel and to Kayla, that we'd never give up looking for the truth. Some days that vow seemed impossible, but we stuck to it anyway. And then, in a totally unexpected turn of events, their determination would at last be rewarded. Nobody could have imagined the truth, when it did finally emerge, would rock Portland to its very foundations. You see, the world in 2005 was quite different from the one that investigators would come to understand years down the line. The forensic equipment that existed then was crude in relation to the technology that would later redefine what was possible. "When Rachel went missing," said Dr. Natalie Rivera of the Oregon State Crime Lab, "we were only able to analyze DNA if there was something conspicuous, blood, saliva, or hair with roots. Now we can recover a genetic footprint from as little as a fingerprint smear or even from a breath particle on a mask. The sensitivity is orders of magnitude greater. By 2015, next-generation sequencing had transformed DNA analysis. Researchers were able to construct usable profiles from previously deemed too degraded to be relevant. And phenotyping followed, technology that could forecast an individual's physical characteristics, such as eye color or hair texture, from their DNA. Without even a direct match in a database, officers could now visualize who they were searching for. At the same time, digital forensics was also revolutionizing. In 2005, investigators were barely able to trace calls or tower pings. But by the mid-2000s, analysts were able to recreate entire patterns of movement by cross-referencing metadata from phones, GPS logs, even cloud backups. "The devices we carry," said technology expert Dr. James Morton, "they've become digital witnesses. Even when someone thinks they've deleted everything, the breadcrumbs remain. We just needed the right tools to find them. And possibly the greatest surprise was brought by something no one predicted: artificial intelligence. What used to take months to analyze by human investigators could now be done in hours. AI could compare data sets, identify patterns that were invisible to the human eye, and bridge the smallest dots across geography and time. The question was, could it at last crack the case of what had become of Rachel Sullivan? Machine learning has revolutionized how investigations are done today. Such sophisticated algorithms can bridge gaps within seas of indiscriminate data, patterns that could take years for human investigators to discover, if at all. So when the Portland Cold Case Unit was awarded a significant technology grant in early 2024, they recognized a once-in-a-lifetime chance to give new life to forgotten puzzles. Among the first cases they chose to review was one that had bedeviled every detective who'd ever worked on it: the vanishing of Rachel Sullivan. Detective Camilla Ortiz, who just inherited the file from retiring Detective Sarah Linden, recalls that day well. "Sullivan was the ideal case," she said. "We had vast amounts of raw data, decades worth, but it had never been integrated. The complete lack of answers made it an ideal candidate for a new way of analysis. It started by digitizing it all: transcripts of interviews, photographs, reports, even evidence records. Frayed old VHS tapes from neighborhood businesses near the St. John's Bridge got restored and enhanced with the aid of AI video reconstruction. Old cell phone records that were out of date were fed into cutting-edge geolocation modeling software, able to detect movements that older systems couldn't even perceive. And along came a breakthrough that only new technology could provide. The DNA samples taken from Rachel's car back in 2005, once categorized as too small to test, were retested via touch DNA techniques. It was a painstaking, methodical process, but for the cold case team, it was a means of rewriting what was possible. If you're watching this and believe more resources should go towards solving cold cases like Rachel's, Let me know in the comments. These efforts can and do change lives. For 6 long months, Ortiz and her team fed data into their system, layer by layer. They weren't just looking for big dramatic revelations. They were hunting for anomalies, those tiny inconsistencies that hide the truth in plain sight. We were searching for the detail that didn't fit, Ortiz explained. That's where the truth usually lives. And in August 2024, after months of tireless work, the system finally flagged something strange, an overlooked entry buried deep in the original evidence catalog. It was the kind of small, easily dismissed detail that would soon blow the entire case wide open. By the way, what's the weather like where you're watching from? Here in the studio, it's got a chill inside tonight, and somehow it's easy to imagine that snowy evening in Portland in 2005, the evening that everything changed. What followed would not only uncover a 20-year-old mystery, it would reveal a more shocking truth than anyone could have dreamed. On a dusty metal shelf in the Portland Police Evidence Warehouse sat a cardboard box, unopened for 18 years. Inside were Rachel Sullivan's belongings, items found on her silver Honda Civic that cold January morning. A coffee cup, her purse, Kayla's stuffed rabbit, and a small, spiral-bound notebook that had been cataloged, photographed, and then forgotten. In steps Detective Mia Carson, a rising star, freshly assigned to the Cold Case Division in the late year of 2022. She'd made herself a personal promise. Each month, she'd take one of these old cases and read it from start to finish. That file in February of 2023 was Rachel Sullivan's. "I don't read summaries," Carson said. "I read through each photo, each transcript, each evidence tag. Sometimes it just takes a second set of eyes." As she came to the evidence inventory, one thing stood out from the rest: the notebook in Rachel's car. The initial log had merely listed it as work notebook, partial marketing notes. Investigators had given it a quick glance in 2005, snapped a couple of photos, and bagged it in plastic. But Carson was troubled by something about it. "When I held it up to the light," she said, "I saw indentations on the pages. Those pale impressions left when one writes on the page above. The 2005 team spoke of them, but then they didn't have the equipment to read what they stated." Carson asked to employ a sophisticated electrostatic detection apparatus, ESDA, a device capable of making hidden indentations appear in breathtaking clarity. When the test results arrived, her heart skipped a beat. The notebook held a string of lightly pressed phrases and digits, dates, times, and brief cryptic remarks. Two of them stood out immediately: SM property records, proof of diversion. The two letters SM caught her eye. Browsing through the case file, Carson saw a familiar name: Rachel's immediate boss at the marketing startup where she'd worked, Scott Mercer. The initials SM were no longer mere letters on paper. They were a flashing red flag calling out for attention. This discovery came right as the Portland Cold Case Unit gained access to a new digital forensics platform known as Finder. Think of it as a supercharged detective's assistant, able to reanalyze old electronic data with levels of precision that would have been unimaginable back in 2005. Detective Jason Powell, the team's computer forensics expert, was the ideal person to put Finder to the test. "The system can connect dots even the most experienced analyst might miss," Powell said. "It doesn't get tired, and it doesn't make assumptions." Within days, Finder had found something odd in the computerized backup of Rachel Sullivan's abandoned laptop: a trail of erased web activity. It showed that, in the weeks leading up to her vanishing, Rachel had visited county property record websites and business registration databases numerous times. Each search had a single thread in common: Scott Mercer. But it wasn't over. Powell recovered pieces of erased emails from Rachel's account, drafts she'd sent to an attorney who handled financial fraud cases. The initial consultation, booked for the Monday following her disappearance. If this story intrigues you as much as it does us, go ahead and like this video. It helps bring so much attention to stories like Rachel's. As Powell pieced together the puzzle, something came into focus. Rachel hadn't been searching property records for entertainment purposes. She was digging up information, and the trail was pointing to embezzlement at her office. Rachel was the marketing director, Powell explained. She saw financial information most employees never did. From what we recovered, it looks like she discovered money being diverted from investor deposits, money that could have been diverted directly into Mercer. With that information, Detectives Carson and Powell re-interviewed some of the former employees of Rachel's previous startup. One at a time, they remembered the same thing. Rachel had appeared nervous in her last few weeks. She was working late, holding closed door, tense meetings with Mercer, and appeared abnormally distracted. Back then, in 2005, those facts didn't set off alarms, Carson said. In the absence of the background of a financial investigation, it just appeared to be normal workplace stress. But now, it was obvious she was in deep. The break came when Carson persuaded the court to obtain Scott Mercer's financial records from 2004 to 2006. What they uncovered chilled them to the bone. Only 3 weeks prior to the vanishing of Rachel, Mercer bought a remote estate in the Cascade Mountains, cash paid, using a shell corporation. And within weeks of her disappearance, sizable payments were made to a building company that had poured a concrete slab on the same estate. That property became the center of our attention, Carson explained. It had been bought and resold throughout the years, but due to the way Mercer went about concealing ownership, it was never traced back to him during the initial investigation. Then there was the ultimate scientific breakthrough, the one only today's technology could make. With a sophisticated MVAC wet vacuum DNA collection system, technicians resampled Rachel's vehicle, going over areas never before possible to effectively test in 2005. The findings were astounding. Partial DNA matches to Scott Mercer were obtained on the gear shift and steering wheel adjustment lever, the type of intimate contact zones only a driver would manage. That was big, Powell stated. Mercer had informed investigators at the time that he'd never even set foot in Rachel's vehicle. Now we had physical evidence to contradict that. By the way, what time of day is it where you're watching from? One of the wonderful things about our community is watching how far stories like this travel across continents and time zones. From that point on, the case started to proceed quickly. Detectives placed surveillance on Mercer, now a well-regarded Portland businessman with a meticulously constructed image. In weeks, they acquired search warrants for his current home, as well as that enigmatic mountain property. When investigators visited the property, now in the hands of someone entirely unfamiliar, they saw something strange in the history of construction. A concrete slab poured in late January 2005, smack in the middle of winter, when that type of work was almost impossible because of frozen earth. The team swept beneath the slab with ground-penetrating radar. The machine glowed with anomalies, abnormalities in the earth where nothing should have been there. The dig went quietly at dawn, and then hidden under layers of frigid concrete, cops found a sealed waterproof box. In it were the things that brought everyone to a halt: Rachel's purse, her driver's license, her lost cell phone, and her house keys, the ones she always kept with her. Discovering those personal items, Carson said quietly, was the moment we knew, the moment everything changed. Finally, after 18 long years, we knew what occurred that night. Those were Detective Mia Carson's words when the truth finally emerged. A truth so startling that it would turn Portland's perception of one of its most esteemed citizens upside down. On April 23, 2023, the story that had haunted the Sullivan family for nearly 2 decades took a dramatic turn. Scott Mercer, age 56, and now the high-profile CEO of a booming tech company, was arrested outside his sleek downtown office building. The same man who had publicly mourned Rachel Sullivan, donated to reward funds, and stood beside her grieving mother at vigils, was now charged with first-degree murder. The notebook that nobody had seen, combined with 21st century forensic science, had at last ripped the veil off the man who had concealed himself in the open. That Monday morning started as any other day for Mercer. He came into his glass-enclosed office building on Portland's waterfront around 7:30 a.m., nodding hello to the security guards before slipping into his own private elevator to the top level. His staff only observed the smooth, composed executive, not the one who, in mere hours, would be under arrest. Unaware to him, Detective Mia Carson and her unit had already convened in the security office of the building. 4 officers in plain clothes covertly took positions in the lobby. Another 2 hid in unmarked cars beneath. Each step had been carefully orchestrated. Considering Mercer's size and means, we could not afford for him to get even a whiff of what was going down, Carson later explained. By 5:45 p.m., Mercer's assistant warned the security that her boss was leaving. That was the cue. As Mercer exited the elevator, Detective Carson and her partner approached calmly but firmly. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Carson with the Portland Police. We need you to come with us." Security cameras caught the moment, Mercer's face shifting from puzzlement to icy resignation. He didn't protest, didn't struggle. He just nodded, adjusted his jacket, and accompanied the detectives to an unmarked sedan. Handcuffs were not used until they arrived at the subterranean police garage. A minor nicety, one that would come under fire later. But by 6:30 p.m., Mercer had been formally charged with first-degree murder. Within 8 p.m., the news had blasted on Portland's media stations. The response? Utter disbelief. Scott Mercer was not just another corporate type. He was Portland's golden boy of technology. The guy who made startups successful, hired hundreds of local people, and appeared to exist to give to charity. His foundation and his wife's had given millions to charities in Portland. He served on the board of Portland Children's Hospital, was chairman of the City Technology Innovation Council, and gave out Christmas scholarships. To most, the news was unbelievable. "It was like learning that Mr. Rogers was a serial murderer," said resident Jaime Winters, who had met Mercer at a number of charity functions. "This guy funded half the tech conferences in the city. He donated to families who couldn't afford rent. It just doesn't make sense." But most chillingly of all, Mercer had become an integral part of the very case he'd instigated. In 2010, on the 5th anniversary of Rachel's vanishing, he established the Rachel Sullivan Memorial Scholarship, a memorial fund for single mothers who were earning business degrees. He'd attended vigils with Rachel's mother, Margaret Sullivan. He'd even been photographed consoling her. "The audacity is breathtaking," said Kathleen Morris, editor of the Portland Tribune. "To take someone's life, then insert yourself into their family's grief. It shows a kind of emotional cruelty that's hard to comprehend." As the details of the case emerged, so did a clearer picture of what had been hiding beneath the polished surface of Mercer's reputation. Rachel's role at Mercer's initial startup had been more profound than individuals previously believed. As the marketing director, she wasn't only managing promotions. She was also responsible for investor relations, advocating for openness that Mercer pushed back against. Her former colleagues spoke of growing tension in the months leading up to her disappearance. Rachel insisted on doing things the book way, remembered Daniel, a one-time colleague. She thought the company could be great, but she wouldn't stretch the truth or mislead shareholders regarding growth figures. That created tension. Friends of the case today think that what Rachel discovered and refused to keep quiet about could have sent her to her doom. By summer 2024, rumors had been making the rounds among Portland's legal community. Rumors that Scott Mercer, the city's fallen tech hero, was in negotiations to cut a deal. The former celebrated entrepreneur, who'd stood on gala podiums and charity boards, now paced in his cell facing trial for premeditated murder of Rachel Sullivan, a woman he'd killed to keep quiet about the empire he'd built on deception. Prosecutors had put together what one legal expert described as a fortress of evidence. The case featured DNA trails connecting Mercer to Rachel's vehicle, going against his 2005 claims. Recovered emails indicating Rachel's intentions to see a financial crimes lawyer. Bank transfers indicating Mercer had channeled over $2.7 million in investor funds to shell accounts. And worst of all, the finding of Rachel's personal belongings buried under that isolated concrete slab deep in the Cascade Mountains. Each disclosure nibbled at Mercer's defense until, in early 2025, his lawyers started confidential negotiations with prosecutors. As later unsealed court filings revealed, Mercer's lawyers met with the district attorney's office with a conditional plea offer. Mercer would tell the entire truth about Rachel's last hours, in return for eliminating the threat of life without parole. It was bittersweet for Margaret, Olivia, and Kayla Sullivan. "For 2 decades, we pleaded to be told what became of Rachel," Olivia said. "But the notion that her murderer might bargain his way into clemency, it was like another betrayal." February 12, 2025, the Portland County Courthouse was filled with reporters, former colleagues, and townspeople who had once idolized Mercer. Cameras were not allowed in, but sketches detailed his changed looks. The sure-handed executive now haggard, gray-haired, and sunken-eyed. When the judge asked Mercer to acknowledge his plea, his voice was barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor. I killed Rachel Sullivan." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. For nearly 2 decades, Mercer had maintained his innocence, even embracing Rachel's family publicly. Now he admitted the unthinkable. According to a statement read by his lawyer, Mercer said Rachel had accosted him in his office on the night of January 15, 2005, insisting that he come clean about the financial fraud she discovered. She threatened to call the police as soon as Monday morning. Mercer said he panicked and invited her in his car to take her home so they could discuss more. What ensued he called an argument that got out of control. Prosecutors pushed back on this characterization. This was not a moment of panic. Lead prosecutor Diane Patel pushed back in court. This was a planned action to silence the only person who could reveal his crimes. Mercer, according to the terms of the plea deal, was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 35 years, essentially guaranteeing he would serve out the rest of his life in prison. For the family of Rachel, it was the culmination of a terrifying chapter, but not the final page. Following the sentencing, Rachel Sullivan, now 22, spoke to reporters outside of the courthouse. Her testimonial, shaking but firm, would come to go viral. "For years, this man smiled in our faces, donated in my mother's name, and pretended to grieve. But today, the mask finally broke. My mom wasn't just a victim of murder. She was a woman who stood up for what was right. And that's the legacy I'll carry forward." The crowd erupted in quiet applause. The Rachel Sullivan Foundation, originally established with a mission of awareness, now extends its purpose, paying for technology grants for cold case research and scholarships for young women seeking careers in criminal justice. Rachel's story did not end in tragedy, Detective Mia Carson said at a press conference in 2025. It ended in truth. And truth, even though it is late, is the beginning of healing. In February 2024, prosecutors had widened their case against Mercer, including charges of financial fraud related to the $2.7 million Rachel was investigating at the time of her murder. 3 months later, with mounting pressure and confronted by a mountain of evidence, DNA, computer records, bank statements, and Rachel's personal items recovered on his land, Scott Mercer eventually accepted a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in return for prosecutors agreeing not to pursue the option of life without parole. "The plea agreement wasn't a simple decision for our family," Olivia Sullivan said outside the hearing, "but it ensured that Mercer would serve at least 25 years in prison, and it saved us from having to relive every brutal detail in a lengthy public trial." That July, the Sullivans confronted Rachel's murderer in court at the sentencing. Margaret Sullivan, firm but obviously upset, made a victim impact statement that brought the room to silence. "You took my daughter's life, her future, and her ability to see her child grow up," she said. "But you couldn't take our resolve to seek the truth." For the law enforcement community of Portland, the resolution of the Rachel Sullivan case was a triumph and a reminder of humility. Detective Carson put it best. "This case reminds us that no evidence is too small, no detail too insignificant. Those faint notebook indentations sat in evidence storage for nearly 2 decades, just waiting for technology and persistence to meet." Nowadays, the Rachel Sullivan Foundation continues to assist families of missing individuals, but with even more emphasis. The foundation has established a new fund dedicated to backing innovative forensic technologies that can give new life to cold cases. The wish is straightforward but transformative, that other families could discover the closure the Sullivans spent almost 2 decades pursuing. Rachel Sullivan, who is now 22 and working towards a master's degree in psychology, uses her own loss to help others. "I lost my childhood having a space where my mom should have been," she told me in a rare interview. "Not knowing the truth didn't make that space disappear, but it explained it to me." Rachel Sullivan's case extends far beyond a true crime news headline. It's a picture of a family's unbending love and belief against all odds. When the detectives had no more leads, when the media buzz was over, and when hope became impossible, the Sullivans wouldn't let Rachel's memory fade. Their perseverance ultimately revealed the truth that lay beneath almost 2 decades of silence. And this case is left with one strong truth: time can hurt and cure. While the years delayed justice, they also provided the tools and understanding that eventually revealed what truly happened on that cold night in Portland in 2005. Behind each cold case is a real individual, a life, a family, and a narrative worth something. Rachel's legacy teaches us that the truth, however long it remains hidden, will ultimately surface. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, enable notifications, and tune in next week when we delve into another case where determination crosses paths with justice. Your support brings these cases to the forefront because all victims have the right to be remembered and every mystery has a right to solve. So where are you watching from today? Leave it in the comments below.